Welcome back to a new episode here in SUALVI. In this second episode of the logo animation series, we're gonna animate these MTVA visual arts logo. So anyways, and also don't forget to check our THEIA transitions pack coming out soon, hopefully. So let's just get started right away. It took me like 3 hours last night to just cut this clip because I had over an hour of screen recorded content of me making this logo and all the roadblocks and all that stuff. So anyway, so the first thing that we did was we add a polygon and we play around with the length to be able to animate that later on. So we just add a Polygon Mask, and then these two settings right here are the ones that we're gonna use to animate it later on. And then we do the same thing for each of all the other sides of this camera portion of the logo, right? So by adding the polygon, and right now the paint mode I set it to copy, but then later on I found out that that was not actually working for some reason. When adding more layers or more nodes, it was not working. So at the end I set the paint node to invert, but I'm gonna remind you that later on again. So I basically just did the same thing for all the four sides of the camera. And after that, for the next part, the inside part of the camera, the little colored lines, I wanted to make them spin and become bigger. So for that I added the eclipse, and then I increased border width so that I was actually just covering that section or that portion of the image. And I also took the solid out, so those two, the black lines in the middle were separated for a different animation. So then the next thing that I did was I added a Polygon Tool again, and so I added a new polygon tool that I wanted to be able to make it spin around, and I used the multiply paint node so that it will only show up when this ellipse and the polygon are right on top of each other, right? So then I moved this to be able to rotate it. I had to move it right into the pivot point, and then I brought it back into the center. So then later on when I would spin it, it will show the color lines that, as you can see right now, it's inverted, so we know that it's working, but the end result is this one for the animation part. Then the next thing that I did was I proceeded to do the same thing with more polygon nodes. So proceeded to use the same node and add that same effect, and then just adding, changing the border width, I was able to cover that space. And then I did the same thing for the circle in the middle because I wanted it to be able to get animated, that same length animation, because if I use a normal eclipse tool, if you use a normal eclipse tool, it was not gonna work. So yeah, playing with the length only works if you have a polygon node. So then for the next part, what I did was I actually separated them into a different media a different version of the logo, I guess you could say, because later on when we are animating it, I wanted to add a transform node to it, so I was able to animate it individually for it. But anyways, yeah. So then another thing that I also forgot was to add the little flash thing there. So I did the same thing using the same method pretty much for everything in this logo. And then once that part is ready, when that part is ready and we make sure that everything is working to be animated, I start by animating that line in the middle by starting from the back also. So use 15 frames for it. So it starts at 0, and then I animated the length also, the length of this one at the bottom too, by using the same parameter range from 0 to 15 frames. And by animating the length portion of it, I was able to obtain that opening effect, or all of them building up, right? So then I did the same thing for all the different sections of the camera also, and I'm just speeding through that because you don't want to watch 10 minutes of me just tweaking these little polyline strokes or lines or whatever. yeah, so then for the last part in the top flash one, I did pretty much the same again. I just animated the length and the position. I was just choosing to animate the position in this occasion because of the side that the animation was coming from. And by playing around, you'll realize what to do. So then the next part was I wanted to animate these using the rotation. So I started actually a little bit later. So I started frame 6 or 7, and I ended it a little bit later, like after all the other parts were ready. So after that, I just added a bunch of rotations, like 5 maybe. And another thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to add the actual area. So for that, you just go down here and press set keyframe, and then you're able to tweak these and it will just act as a keyframe if you do it. I tried to do it fully at first, just from one on, and I didn't like the result. So then I had to actually go sort of like keyframe by keyframe, adjusting the area. And whenever you make any changes, it actually automatically adjusts itself. So it works like that, and it is actually able to cover the whole area up. And that's what I kind of wanted to do with this. For the circle in the middle, I animated the length also, and I just created a keyframe at the beginning of those. Not at the beginning, but at the same time that the color circle. So starting at 6 or 7, and I ended it a little bit earlier. I ended that one right at the same time that the other animation ended, like a few keyframes after. And then another thing that I wanted to do for that was I wanted to make it rotate. So I added a transform node and put the pivot point right in the center of that. And after adding in the center, I added a rotation right from the beginning, but I went ahead and skipped a couple more frames because I wanted to keep spinning a little bit after the whole thing was done, right? Like that. So then after that, what is left is we need to add the text portion of it. And for that, I added a mask on the text, and I also added a transform node to be able to animate this part. I wanted it to slide out of the other part, but by making a couple of tweaks, that was the only way to do it. So we need a mask on the transform node and on the text node, so that because these are all same image animations, the same image as the base, like the logo. So if we didn't have a mask on top of the text area, the animation was not working. So there. So after adding, so I had to add a mask on top of the text there too. And that was able to make the actual animation work like that. So then I went ahead and selected the keyframe right a little bit after the whole camera animation was done. And I just used a position keyframe to make it slide from outside, from behind that portion. Just like that, by adding simple keyframes on the center and the position option. And then that is pretty much it. Then the last thing that I did was I went ahead to the Spline Editor and I just selected all of them and I just pressed F. Basically, I'm just speeding through the process here because it's basically doing the same. And then I also added motion blur, and I'm just speeding through it because it's all the same process. And after you've done it once, it's not complicated, right? And then it looks like that. So then after that whole thing was done, the next thing that I added was a drop shadow. And to animate that, I animated the first thing that I animated was the drop distance and the shadow strength after the whole thing, because it was after the whole animation is done, I wanted it to go back behind the camera like you were seeing here. So I animated the drop distance so it goes there, but then it still looks a little bit not cool. So then I also, after the whole thing goes there, I added a couple of keyframes after and I made the shadow strength so it sort of disappears. And then this is how we can see the whole thing looking afterwards. And yeah, and that was pretty much how I animated this logo for the THEIA Visual Arts. I don't know if it's a channel or what, but yeah, for that. So anyways, I hope that this episode was cool and that you learned another way of animating your logos and that you enjoyed it. And don't forget to give it a like if you like the content, and comment down below what you want to see or what are your thoughts or anything that you want. So yeah, I hope to see you in the next episode of the logo animation series here in SUALVI.